Steve Jobs spent entire nights immersed in the writings of a philosopher who was banned 300 years ago. Einstein kept the works of this same thinker on his desk, consulting him constantly as if he were an invisible advisor. Elon Musk mentions this name in interviews, in private conversations at crucial decision moments, as if he were dialoguing with a mentor who transcends centuries. That philosopher is Baruch Spinoza, a man who was excommunicated at 23 by his own Jewish community. Expelled, cursed, erased from existence while still breathing, a thinker whom the Inquisition relentlessly pursued, whom Jews and Christians tried to silence with all their might, and who died poor, alone and forgotten at 44 in a rented room in Holland. But 300 years later, the greatest visionaries of the modern world returned to him as if returning to a pure and inexhaustible source of wisdom. Not by chance, not by intellectual fashion, not because it's trendy to quote ancient philosophers, but because Spinoza discovered something that very few men discover in an entire lifetime: the exact formula for absolute mental freedom. What these giants found in Spinoza wasn't abstract theory disconnected from reality. It wasn't ivory tower philosophy. It was a manual of psychological warfare, a code of conduct for men who categorically refuse to live on autopilot. A surgical treatise on how to build absolute personal power in a world that has invested everything to keep you mediocre, obedient, and controllable. While most men spend their lives chasing external validation, Spinoza developed a philosophical system that makes others' approval completely irrelevant. While entire masses destroy themselves in useless emotional dramas, Spinoza created a mental control methodology that transforms emotions into tools. While billions of people live trapped in dogmas they've never questioned, Spinoza taught how to free the mind from any invisible prison. And if you want to understand exactly what Steve Jobs, Einstein, and Elon Musk discovered in this cursed philosopher, I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel, because what we're going to explore here isn't shallow self-help promising results in 7 days. It's not empty motivational speech that makes you feel good for 10 minutes and then evaporates. It's pure philosophy, transformed into concrete life strategy. It's the kind of knowledge that separates ordinary men from men who build empires from scratch, who revolutionize entire industries, who change the course of history. And if you want to be part of this journey, if you want access to this level of content, hit that subscribe button now. Let's go together. Prepare yourself. Take a deep breath, because what comes next will completely reformulate your vision of freedom, purpose, and personal power. And once you understand these principles, there's no going back. You'll never see the world the same way again. At 23, Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated by the Jewish community of Amsterdam. The herem cast upon him was the most severe a Jew could receive. It wasn't a temporary suspension. It wasn't a warning. It was an eternal curse. No one could speak to him. No one could eat with him. No one could do business with him. No one could even acknowledge his existence on the streets. His own family abandoned him. Childhood friends turned their backs. He was literally erased from society, treated as if he were already dead. The herem document said, "Let him be cursed by day and cursed by night, cursed when he lies down and cursed when he rises, cursed when he goes out and cursed when he enters. May the Lord never forgive him. May the Lord's wrath burn against this man." Most men would have completely collapsed, would have begged for forgiveness on their knees, would have denied their convictions to return to the comfort of the group, would have accepted any humiliation to be readmitted to the community, because for most people, social rejection is worse than physical death. Spinoza did the opposite. He took his few books, his lens-polishing tools, and went to live alone in a rented room. He chose solitude not as punishment, but as liberation. He transformed forced exile into voluntary exile. He took the curse and transformed it into a blessing. He understood something that very few men understand. Strategic solitude is the secret laboratory of greatness, not the solitude of failure, not the isolation of depression, not the seclusion of fear, but the deliberate, conscious, and strategic solitude of the man who knows that, to build something truly extraordinary, he needs to completely distance himself from the deafening noise of the world, from others' opinions that kill visions, from social expectations that destroy dreams before they're even born. Strategic solitude is where you stop being influenced by external pressures. It's where you finally manage to hear your own thoughts without interference. It's where you build true convictions instead of simply repeating what others have said. It's where you develop real mental strength instead of depending on constant validation. Steve Jobs lived this in his own skin brutally. When he was fired from Apple in 1985, he wasn't just fired, he was publicly humiliated. The company he founded, that he built from scratch in a garage, completely rejected him. The board of directors chose the executive Jobs had hired instead of choosing the founder himself. It was a public betrayal, a humiliating defeat broadcast to the entire world. Jobs could have begged to return, could have sold himself to other companies offering his talent to the highest bidder, could have accepted defeat and spent the rest of his life as an ordinary executive in some corporation. Instead, he disappeared. He went to the creative desert. He spent years working on projects that no one understood, that no one supported, that no one believed would work. Next was a spectacular commercial failure. The computers cost too much and sold very little, but it was in this period of absolute strategic solitude, far from the spotlight, far from expectations, far from Wall Street pressure, that Jobs completely refined his vision. He developed his design philosophy. He matured his deep understanding of what it meant to create perfect products. He transformed from a talented but impulsive young man into a mature and relentless leader. When he returned to Apple in 1997, he was no longer the same man. He was stronger, clearer, more focused, more relentless, and in the next 14 years, he transformed Apple into the world's most valuable company. But this was only possible because he used strategic solitude to completely rebuild himself. Einstein also knew this profound solitude. While working at the patent office in Bern, he was completely isolated from the academic world. No important professor knew him. No prestigious university wanted him. He had no connections, no influential mentors, no access to the intellectual circles of the time. He was a complete nobody in the scientific world. He spent entire days alone. He analyzed invention patents during normal hours. And during the nights, on weekends, in stolen moments, he developed the theory of relativity, alone, in silence, without supervision from any professor, without approval from any academic committee, without the pressure of having to conform to the expectations of classical physics. That isolation wasn't an accident. It was the perfect environment for one of the greatest minds in history to think without interruptions, without external influences distorting his reasoning, without the constant pressure to conform to the academic expectations of the time. Einstein didn't have to impress any professor, didn't have to follow any established line of research. He was free to think the unthinkable. And that's exactly what he did. Elon Musk spent entire nights literally sleeping on the floor of empty Tesla factories. It wasn't a performance for the media. It wasn't a publicity stunt. He was on the brink of total bankruptcy. Tesla was weeks away from collapse. SpaceX had failed 3 times in a row and was on its last launch before running out of money. Investors were abandoning him. The media was destroying him daily. Industry experts were publicly saying he was a charlatan who knew nothing about cars. While all this was happening, Musk chose the solitude of the early mornings in silent industrial plants. Not because he had nowhere to go. He could have been in his comfortable mansion, could have been at celebrity parties, could have been doing public relations to improve his image. But he chose the cold factory floor because he knew that silence, that total absence of others' opinions, was the only place where he could keep his vision completely intact. When you're alone on a factory floor at 3 in the morning, there's no one telling you it's impossible. There's no one planting doubts in your mind. There's no one distracting you with political drama. There's just you, the problem, and the solution. And it was in this state of absolute strategic solitude that Musk solved the problems that saved his companies. Spinoza taught this 300 years ago when he wrote in the Ethics, "The multitude is only powerful when united by fear, but the free man acts by reason, not by fear." The multitude needs constant validation because it lives in fear, fear of rejection, fear of exclusion, fear of being alone. That's why it moves in herds. That's why it thinks alike. That's why it follows trends. That's why it never creates anything original. Because originality requires solitude, requires the courage to distance yourself from the group, requires the strength to think alone. The Sigma man doesn't have this fear. He understands that strategic solitude is where real personal power is forged in fire. It's in silence that you finally hear your own thoughts. instead of echoes of others' opinions. It's in the absence of external validation that you build true convictions instead of borrowed convictions. It's far from the herd that you develop the true courage to follow your own path, even when everyone says you're wrong. Strategic solitude isn't punishment. It's not pathological social isolation. It's not seclusion from fear. It's a conscious and powerful choice. It's you recognizing that your time and your mental energy are your most valuable resources, and that you can't waste them on constant social validation, on small daily dramas, on superficial conversations that lead nowhere. The greatest men in history chose strategic solitude consciously. They didn't wait to be rejected. They distanced themselves voluntarily because they understood that greatness requires absolute focus, and absolute focus requires silence, and silence only exists in solitude. Spinoza didn't accept any ready-made truth. He didn't believe in religious dogmas just because everyone believed. He didn't follow millennial traditions just because it's always been this way. He didn't respect authorities just because they were authorities. He investigated everything, questioned everything, tested everything, destroyed false beliefs with relentless logic and incontestable evidence, and he was almost killed multiple times for it. In 1672, during a brutal political massacre in Amsterdam, 2 political leaders were literally torn apart by an enraged mob. Their bodies were mutilated in the streets. It was a moment of total collective hysteria. Spinoza, always guided by reason, wanted to go to the massacre site to preach rationality in the midst of that bloody chaos. He wanted to try to restore common sense in the midst of madness. His friends literally locked him inside the house, held him physically, hid his clothes. They knew with absolute certainty that if he went out at that moment he would be instantly lynched by the mob, because people who think differently, who question the collective narrative, who try to bring reason when everyone is immersed in emotion, these people are dangerous to the status quo. They expose comfortable lies. They destroy collective illusions. They force the masses to confront truths that everyone prefers to ignore, and the masses hate that. The masses kill for that. Spinoza knew this, but he didn't stop thinking independently, because he understood something fundamental. Independent thinking isn't intellectual luxury. It's a survival weapon. It's what separates free men from mental slaves. It's what separates creators from followers. It's what separates leaders from the herd. Steve Jobs built his entire career, his complete legacy, on absolutely independent thinking. He didn't ask the market what they wanted, didn't conduct endless focus groups, didn't follow consumer research, didn't chase trends. He created what the market didn't even know it needed. He saw futures that no one else saw. When he presented the iPhone in 2007, technology industry experts said it was too expensive, too big, that no one would want a phone without a physical keyboard. BlackBerry dominated the market. Nokia was unbeatable. Microsoft was entering the mobile market strongly. All the experts said Apple was making a catastrophic mistake. Jobs completely ignored all of them because he didn't think like them. He didn't see the world like them. He studied Italian design, Japanese calligraphy, Zen Buddhism, minimalist architecture, and Spinoza's philosophy. He built a mind that didn't follow established patterns, but destroyed them, and created completely new patterns. The result? The iPhone became the most successful product in human history, generated trillions of dollars, completely changed the way billions of people live, created entire industries that didn't exist before. And all this happened because one man had the courage to think completely independently and ignore all the experts. Einstein did something similar in physics. He rejected Newtonian physics when absolutely the entire scientific community accepted it as absolute and unquestionable truth. Newton was venerated almost like a god. His laws had worked perfectly for 200 years. No serious physicist questioned the fundamentals of Newtonian mechanics, Einstein questioned, not out of arrogance, not to be contrary, but because he saw inconsistencies that no one else saw. He realized that Newtonian physics didn't explain certain phenomena. He had the intellectual courage to say, maybe Newton was wrong or incomplete, and then he spent years developing completely new physics, tested, calculated, proved mathematically, and changed science forever. But before changing science, he had to have the moral and intellectual courage to think completely differently from all the physicists of his generation. He had to ignore centuries of scientific consensus and trust only his own reason. Elon Musk lives this every day. He systematically ignores experts who say something is impossible. When he said he would create electric cars better and more desirable than combustion cars, the entire automotive industry laughed. Executives with 50 years of experience said he knew nothing about cars, that electric cars would always be inferior, that consumers would never really want electric cars. Musk ignored all of them, studied battery physics, studied automotive engineering, hired the best engineers, built Tesla from scratch. And today Tesla is worth more than Toyota, Ford, GM and Honda combined. When he said he would land rockets back on Earth to reuse them, aerospace engineers with PhDs from prestigious institutions laughed in his face, said it was impossible, that it violated basic engineering principles, that he was wasting money on a science fiction fantasy. Musk ignored all of them, studied rocket physics, hired brilliant engineers willing to attempt the impossible, failed several times, and then succeeded. And today SpaceX routinely lands rockets and completely dominates the space launch market. When he said he would colonize Mars, that he would make humanity a multiplanetary species, practically everyone said he was crazy, that he was megalomaniacal, that it was impossible, that he should focus on terrestrial problems. Musk continues working toward Mars because he doesn't believe in impossible. He believes that most people confuse impossible with lack of independent thinking. He believes that almost everything people call impossible is just something no one has seriously tried yet. Spinoza wrote in the Ethics, "Those who are governed by reason desire only what is truly good. Those who are governed by emotion desire what seems good." This distinction is absolutely crucial. Most people don't think, they feel. They react emotionally. They follow impulses. They obey social pressures. They accept popular opinions without questioning. They live in a mental prison built by others' opinions and don't even realize they're trapped. They wear what fashion dictates because they want to be accepted. Think what the media says because they don't want the work of investigating alone. Want what advertising orders because they're suggestible. Work in jobs they hate because it's the right thing to do. Get married because it's time. Have children because everyone does. Buy houses because it's a good investment. And they die without ever having had a single truly original thought in their entire lives. The Sigma man doesn't live like this. He categorically refuses to live like this. He completely rebuilds his own mind from scratch. He investigates every belief he has. He questions every tradition imposed on him since childhood. He tests every truth he was taught. He challenges every authority that tries to impose itself on him. And he only accepts as true what has passed the rigorous scrutiny of his own independent reason. Independent thinking isn't childish stubbornness. It's not being contrary just to be. It's not rejecting everything just to seem intelligent. It's having the severe intellectual discipline to investigate absolutely everything before accepting it as truth. It's having the moral courage to reject comfortable lies in favor of uncomfortable truths. It's having the mental strength to build your own convictions even when the entire world, including people you love and respect, says you're completely wrong. And when you develop true independent thinking, something absolutely magical happens. You become completely immune to manipulation. Advertising stops working. Political propaganda stops working. Social pressure stops working. Attempts at mind control stop working because you no longer think with others' heads. You think exclusively with your own head. And no one can control a man who thinks for himself. Spinoza lived during the so-called Dutch Golden Age, a paradoxical period of economic prosperity and absolute social chaos. It was a time of brutal and constant religious wars, widespread extreme fanaticism, systematic and violent persecutions. Catholics killed Protestants in the streets. Protestants killed Catholics in retaliation. Jews were persecuted by both sides. Real or imagined heresies were punished with torture and public death. The world was literally on fire because of abstract theological disagreements. And Spinoza? He simply completely exited the game. He refused to choose a side. He didn't feed the drama. He didn't enter the collective emotional circus that consumed all of society. He didn't participate in the narrative wars. He didn't join any faction. He calmly continued polishing lenses during the day and writing philosophy at night, while the world around him destroyed itself over issues he considered completely irrelevant and fundamentally misformulated. He wrote, "The wise man does not engage in unnecessary conflicts. He acts by reason, not by passion." Steve Jobs did exactly this when he returned to Apple in 1997. The company was completely immersed in suffocating internal drama, toxic corporate politics at all levels. Ego wars between departments, executives more concerned with protecting their territories than creating good products, engineers fighting with designers, marketing fighting with engineering, everyone blaming everyone. Total chaos. Jobs immediately cut 70% of the products, fired executives who fed the political chaos, eliminated entire departments that only existed to justify positions, ignored fierce criticism, ignored dramatic protests, ignored lawsuit threats. He completely refused to participate in corporate drama and focused only and exclusively on the essential, creating extraordinary products that people would love, and he saved the company. In 12 months, Apple went from near bankruptcy to profitability, not because Jobs entered the political game and won, but because he refused to play. He cut all the drama at its root and forced everyone to focus on what really mattered. Einstein completely and consciously avoided all academic politics. He didn't fight for university positions, didn't dispute power in universities, didn't enter ego wars with other physicists, didn't participate in academic collusions, didn't form political alliances. He simply continued thinking, calculating, publishing his papers and letting the work speak for itself. While other brilliant scientists lost years, sometimes entire decades, in petty academic fights, in disputes over credit, in reputation wars, Einstein focused exclusively on pure science. And therefore, while others fought, he discovered. While others destroyed each other in academic dramas, he changed physics forever. Elon Musk is literally attacked every day on social media, in traditional media, by opportunistic politicians, by jealous competitors, by random people who've never built anything but have extremely strong opinions about everything. Thousands of tweets per day, criticizing every decision. Hundreds of articles per week, questioning his sanity. Dozens of politicians using his name to score cheap political points. He could easily spend 12 hours a day responding to every criticism, entering every verbal war, defending himself against every false accusation, suing every slanderer, correcting every lie. He could hire entire public relations teams to manage his image, could become obsessed with his reputation. Instead, he ignores approximately 99% of the attacks and continues building rockets that land themselves, electric cars that drive themselves, underground tunnels for high-speed transportation, neural chips to connect brains to computers, and cutting-edge artificial intelligence systems. Because he perfectly understands that collective drama is humanity's greatest and most efficient waste of time. Drama drains vital energy. Drama surgically kills focus. Drama transforms productive men into useless emotional slaves. Drama is the main weapon mediocre people use to drag geniuses down to their level, and it works spectacularly well. Most talented men completely waste their lives responding to empty criticism, defending themselves against baseless attacks, desperately trying to prove their worth to people who will never, under any circumstances, recognize them anyway. The Sigma man doesn't fall into this obvious trap. He deeply understands that ignoring is real power. Not responding is the most powerful response. Strategic silence is infinitely more powerful than 1,000 brilliant arguments, because while others scream and wear themselves out, he silently builds. While others fight and waste energy, he advances relentlessly. While others consume themselves in completely useless conflicts, he invisibly accumulates real power. Spinoza was literally physically attacked on the street by a religious fanatic who tried to assassinate him with a knife. The man chased him in broad daylight, trying to kill him for heresy. Spinoza managed to escape, but his coat was torn by the blade. He kept that torn coat for the rest of his life as a physical reminder of the incident. But you know what he didn't do? He didn't take revenge, didn't sue the aggressor, didn't launch a public campaign against him, didn't enter personal war, didn't feed hatred, didn't become obsessed with the attack. He simply went home, hung the torn coat as a reminder that there were irrational people in the world, and continued writing the ethics as if nothing had happened. because he knew that revenge is exclusively for weak men. Strong men build, and true construction requires absolute focus, and absolute focus requires total and relentless rejection of collective drama in all its forms. After that physical attack that almost killed him, Spinoza didn't panic, didn't develop paralyzing fear, didn't stop going out, didn't become paranoid, didn't start seeing enemies everywhere. He just continued living completely normally, working normally, thinking normally, as if absolutely nothing had happened. This wasn't psychopathic coldness. It wasn't lack of emotion. It wasn't some mental disorder. It was absolute emotional control. It was the rare ability to feel emotions fully, but not be governed by them. It was the extraordinary ability to keep reason functioning perfectly, even under extreme stress. He wrote in the Ethics, "The mind has greater power over emotions when it understands them clearly." This sentence seems simple, but it contains one of the most powerful truths ever discovered about human nature. Most people are completely enslaved by their own emotions. They feel anger and explode instantly. Feel fear and stop immediately. Feel sadness and give up on everything. Feel anxiety and become paralyzed. They react impulsively and automatically to every external emotional stimulus, like Pavlov's dogs reacting to the bell, and then they wonder why their lives are chaotic, why they never reach their goals, why they live on a constant and exhausting emotional roller coaster, why they feel they have no control over their own lives. Steve Jobs was brutally betrayed by executives he deeply trusted, was publicly humiliated when he was fired from the very company he created from scratch, had to watch from the outside while Apple, his creation, his baby, withered under incompetent leadership, was rejected, ridiculed, written off as finished by the technology media. He could have become completely bitter, could have systematically avenged everyone who betrayed him, could have spent years suing people, destroying reputations, feeding toxic resentment, could have let that hatred consume his life. Instead, he used that immense pain as pure fuel, transformed rejection into determination, transformed humiliation into motivation, created Pixar and revolutionized the animation industry, created Next and developed technologies that would later become fundamental. And when he returned to Apple 12 years later, he returned infinitely stronger, more focused, more relentless, more mature, because he didn't let emotion govern his decisions. He consciously transformed it into productive energy. Einstein lost absolutely everything in Nazi Germany, saw close friends die in concentration camps, saw his science officially called Jewish physics and rejected as inferior, had all his assets confiscated, had to flee his homeland as a refugee, start over from absolute zero on another continent, in another language, in another culture. He could have become bitter, revolted, consumed by justifiable hatred against the Nazis, could have spent the rest of his life obsessed with revenge, could have let that pain and that hatred define who he was. Instead, he continued thinking, creating, contributing massively to humanity, continued being kind, continued being generous, continued being productive, because he wasn't a slave to his emotions, even the most justifiable emotions that exist. He fully recognized them, but didn't let them govern his life. Elon Musk literally lost billions of dollars in a few months, was brutally and daily ridiculed by world media, almost went personally bankrupt multiple times. Tesla came to be weeks away from total bankruptcy. SpaceX had 3 consecutive failures and was on its last launch before the money ran out, went through devastating public divorces, suffered coordinated attacks from politicians and competitors trying to destroy his reputation, was accused of everything possible to accuse someone of. And in each potentially destructive crisis, he took a deep breath, mentally recomposed himself, and continued working with the same intensity, because he deeply understands that uncontrolled emotions destroy powerful men more efficiently than any external enemy. Spinoza taught that emotions themselves aren't the problem. The problem is being blindly governed by them without understanding them. Anger can be transformed into productive determination. Fear can be transformed into intelligent strategic caution. Sadness can be transformed into genuine and deep compassion. But this only happens when you develop absolute emotional control through clear understanding. And absolute emotional control doesn't mean violently repressing emotions, doesn't mean pretending you feel nothing, doesn't mean becoming a robot without feelings. It means understanding your emotions so deeply that you can consciously choose how to respond to them instead of reacting automatically. It means observing your own emotional reactions like a scientist observes an interesting natural phenomenon. It means creating deliberate mental space between stimulus and response. It means developing the ability to feel intense anger but choose not to act with anger. Feel genuine fear but choose not to decide with fear. Feel deep sadness but choose not to give up because of it. The Sigma man feels all normal human emotions, but he doesn't act automatically based on them. He feels anger when betrayed, but doesn't act impulsively with anger. He feels fear when facing real danger, but doesn't make decisions based on fear. He feels sadness when he loses something important, but doesn't abandon his goals because of it. Because he developed the rarest and most valuable ability in the modern world, the extraordinary capacity to feel fully without being governed by what he feels. Spinoza knew exactly, with surgical precision, what would happen when he published his revolutionary ideas, knew he would be violently hated, knew he would be relentlessly persecuted, knew he would probably die poor and alone long before anyone minimally recognized his value, knew his name would be synonymous with heresy for centuries, knew he would be cursed for generations, and even knowing all this with absolute certainty, he wrote, he published, he spread his ideas, because he wasn't seeking anyone's approval, he was exclusively seeking truth, and truth for Spinoza was infinitely more important than being loved, accepted, admired, or remembered. He said, truth is its own evidence. It doesn't need witnesses. Think about the depth of that statement. Truth doesn't need you to believe in it to be true. Gravity worked perfectly millions of years before Newton discovered it. Relativity was true billions of years before Einstein proved it. Truth exists independently of our approval, and truly, free men serve truth, not approval. Steve Jobs was intensely hated by hundreds of employees, was publicly called an impossible tyrant, abusive perfectionist, cruel boss who destroyed people. Former employees wrote entire books detailing how horrible it was to work for him. He was aware of all this, read the criticism, knew perfectly well he was hated. He didn't change absolutely anything, because he wasn't seeking to be loved by employees. He was seeking to create absolutely perfect products that transformed lives. And perfect products require impossible-to-reach standards, and impossible standards require you to be hated by people who prefer comfort and mediocrity. Jobs chose perfection over popularity, chose the truth of perfect design over mass approval, chose legacy over affection. And therefore, he created products that billions of people love, even though hundreds of employees hated him. Einstein was systematically rejected by prestigious universities, didn't have a PhD when he published the revolutionary theory of relativity, didn't have important academic connections, didn't have the endorsement of any famous professor, didn't have a respectable position in the scientific hierarchy. He was literally nobody in the academic world. He didn't give up, didn't beg for acceptance, didn't modify his theories to be more palatable to the academic establishment, because he wasn't seeking acceptance from the scientific elite. He was seeking to discover how the universe really works, and the truth about the universe doesn't change based on who approves or disapproves of it. Elon Musk is constantly attacked from all possible sides, by journalists who've never created anything, by politicians who live off popularity, by competitors who are jealous, by random people on the internet who've never built anything significant but have extremely strong opinions about absolutely everything. He continues relentlessly, because he doesn't seek likes on Twitter, doesn't seek media approval, doesn't seek everyone to like and admire him. He seeks to transform humanity into a multiplanetary species. He seeks to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. He seeks to create beneficial artificial intelligence. And these missions are infinitely greater than any childish need for external validation. Most people live as absolute slaves to others' approval. They change their opinions depending on who's in the room, wear different social masks for different groups, betray their own deep convictions to be superficially accepted, live entire lives pretending to be who they're not because they have paralyzing terror of rejection. They choose jobs that pay well but that they hate because it's what's expected, marry people they don't love because it's time, have children they didn't want because it's normal, buy houses they can't afford because it's what successful people do, live completely inauthentic lives from beginning to end because social approval is more important to them than personal truth. The Sigma man absolutely doesn't live like this. He consciously and irrevocably chose truth above approval. He prefers to be hated for being completely authentic than loved for being totally false. He prefers to be absolutely alone being true than surrounded by people living a comfortable lie. And when you make this radical choice, when you decide that truth is more important than approval, something absolutely extraordinary happens. You become completely unshakable, because your identity no longer depends minimally on others' opinions. Your value is no longer determined by likes, by followers, by superficial social approval. You become free, truly, deeply, and irreversibly free. Spinoza systematically destroyed religious dogmas. He proved that the Bible was written by multiple human authors over centuries, not dictated by God. He showed that miracles were misinterpretations of natural phenomena. He freed the human mind from superstition, and he was hated for it, but he didn't back down. Because he knew that empty traditions are invisible prisons. Steve Jobs rejected all corporate tradition, didn't wear suits, didn't follow rigid hierarchies, didn't have endless meetings, didn't follow bureaucratic processes. He created his own corporate culture from scratch and revolutionized the industry. Einstein rejected classical physics, didn't accept Newton as eternal truth just because it had worked for 200 years. He tested, questioned, reformulated, and created completely new physics. Elon Musk rejects the traditional automotive industry, doesn't follow the dealership model, doesn't follow the internal combustion model, doesn't follow the slow pace of innovation. He's creating the future because he refused to follow the past. Most people live trapped in traditions that no longer serve them. They work 40 years at the same job because that's how it's done. They get married in church because it's always been this way. They follow religious rituals they don't understand because my family has always done it. They repeat patterns of behavior that make them unhappy because it's normal. The Sigma man doesn't accept anything without questioning. He investigates every tradition. He tests every rule. He challenges every convention and only follows what makes sense to him. The rest he discards without guilt because he understands that freedom begins when you stop following the script others wrote for you. 7. The silent construction of one's own empire. Spinoza built his legacy in absolute silence. He didn't do self-promotion, didn't seek fame, didn't try to convince anyone of anything. He just worked, polished lenses during the day to pay the bills, wrote philosophy at night, died poor and unknown. 300 years later, humanity's greatest geniuses study his works. Steve Jobs built Apple in silence, didn't give frequent interviews, wasn't at all the Hollywood parties, didn't seek spotlights. He worked obsessively, created obsessively, improved obsessively. And when he presented a product, the world stopped to watch. Einstein built modern physics in silence, wasn't a celebrity when he developed the theory of relativity. He was an anonymous patent office employee, but he was building something that would change humanity forever. Elon Musk builds the future in silence. He's not doing reality shows. He's not selling online courses. He's not giving motivational talks every weekend. He's building rockets, electric cars, tunnels, neural chips, artificial intelligences. And every project he delivers changes the world. Because they all understood what Spinoza taught. True power doesn't shout. It acts. Most people make noise, announce plans, talk about projects that never start, post about changes they never make, live selling dreams while building nothing concrete. The Sigma man doesn't waste time announcing. He's too busy building. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He lets his results speak for him. And when you work in silence, something powerful happens. You eliminate distractions. You don't lose energy explaining your plans to people who won't understand. You don't lose time defending your choices to people who won't support. You just build. And when you finish, the world recognizes. 8. Freedom as life's mission. Spinoza dedicated every single day of his life to intellectual freedom. Not freedom in the shallow, modern sense of doing whatever you want, but freedom in its deepest, most profound meaning. The liberation of the mind from all forms of slavery. Slavery to fear, slavery to superstition, slavery to others' opinions, slavery to irrational emotions, slavery to empty traditions. He was banned from his community at 23, persecuted by religious authorities, attacked physically on the street, isolated socially for his entire adult life. He lived in small, rented rooms, earned barely enough money polishing lenses to survive, ate simple meals, owned almost nothing, had no family, had few friends, died at 44 from a lung disease probably caused by the glass dust he breathed while working. By any conventional measure, his life was a failure. He never became rich, never became famous during his lifetime, never held a prestigious position, never was recognized by the institutions of his time. He died alone, poor, and forgotten. But Spinoza himself would have laughed at calling his life a failure, because he achieved something infinitely more valuable than wealth or fame or recognition. He achieved complete freedom, mental freedom, the freedom to think whatever he wanted, to investigate whatever interested him, to write whatever he discovered, regardless of what anyone thought or said or did. He wrote in the Ethics, "A free man thinks of nothing less than death, and his wisdom is a meditation not on death, but on life." This is the paradox that most people never understand. They think freedom means avoiding pain, avoiding difficulty, avoiding sacrifice. They think freedom is comfort and ease and pleasure. So they spend their entire lives chasing comfort, and they die having never been free for a single moment. Because real freedom requires the exact opposite of comfort. Real freedom requires the willingness to suffer for what you believe, the willingness to be rejected for speaking truth, the willingness to be alone rather than compromise your principles, the willingness to die poor rather than sell your convictions. Spinoza understood this with absolute clarity. He could have been comfortable. He could have accepted the bribe the Jewish community offered him to stay silent. He could have kept his ideas private and lived a normal, comfortable life. He could have conformed, compromised, accommodated, but then he wouldn't have been free. He would have been a slave, a comfortable slave, but a slave nonetheless, a slave to fear of rejection, a slave to desire for approval, a slave to the opinions of others. And Spinoza chose freedom over comfort, truth over approval, integrity over security. Steve Jobs understood this same principle at a cellular level. When he returned to Apple in 1997, he took a salary of $1 per year. $1. He was already wealthy from Pixar, so he didn't need the money. But the symbolism was profound. He wasn't there for money. He wasn't there for status. He wasn't there to build his ego or his bank account. He was there for freedom. The freedom to build exactly what he envisioned. The freedom to create products that would change how people live. The freedom to pursue perfection without compromise. And that freedom was worth more to him than any amount of money. Jobs said in his famous Stanford commencement speech, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. This is freedom, understanding that you came into this world with nothing. You'll leave with nothing, so you have nothing to lose. And when you truly internalize that, when you truly understand that death makes everything else irrelevant, you become completely free. Free to pursue what matters. Free to ignore what doesn't. Free to live according to your deepest values, regardless of consequences." Einstein experienced this freedom most powerfully when he left Germany in 1933. He lost everything: his position at the university, his home, his belongings, his citizenship. His entire life in Germany was erased. He arrived in America as a refugee with almost nothing. But he was free. Free from the Nazi regime. Free from the compromises he would have had to make to stay. Free from the collaboration with evil that remaining in Germany would have required. He chose freedom over everything else. And in that freedom, he continued doing his most important work. Einstein wrote, "I am truly a lone traveler and have never belonged to my country, my home, my friends, or even my immediate family with my whole heart. In the face of all this, I have never lost a sense of distance and a need for solitude. This is the loneliness of freedom. When you choose to be truly free, you accept that you will walk alone, because most people don't choose freedom. They choose comfort, security, approval, and they can't understand why anyone would choose otherwise. But the free man doesn't need others to understand. He doesn't need approval. He doesn't need company on his path. He walks alone if necessary, because the alternative, compromising his freedom to fit in, is unthinkable." Elon Musk embodies this same principle in the modern era. He could have retired after selling PayPal, could have spent the rest of his life in comfort and luxury, could have bought yachts and private islands, and enjoyed the easy life of a billionaire. Instead, he invested everything he had into Tesla and SpaceX, two companies that everyone said would fail. He risked everything, worked himself to exhaustion, slept on factory floors, faced bankruptcy multiple times. Why? For freedom. Not freedom from work. He works more than almost anyone, but freedom to pursue what he believes matters, freedom to work on making humanity multiplanetary, freedom to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, freedom to tackle the biggest problems he can find, regardless of difficulty or risk. Musk said, "I didn't go into the rocket business, the car business, or the solar business thinking, this is a great opportunity. I thought, this must be done, and if I don't do it, it won't get done." This is freedom as mission, understanding that you have one life, limited time, and the freedom to choose what you do with it. And if you're truly free, you choose to work on what matters most, regardless of difficulty, regardless of odds, regardless of what anyone else thinks. The mission of freedom isn't passive. It's not sitting on a beach drinking margaritas. It's not avoiding responsibility or challenge. It's the active choice to dedicate your life to what you believe matters most. And that choice, that commitment, is the highest form of freedom. Most people never experience this freedom. They spend their entire lives in various forms of slavery. Slavery to jobs they hate because they need the paycheck. Slavery to relationships that drain them because they fear being alone. Slavery to others' opinions because they need approval. Slavery to comfort because they fear discomfort. Slavery to convention because they fear standing out. They tell themselves they're free because they can choose between different brands of the same product, different channels showing the same content, different jobs offering the same unfulfilling work. But these aren't real choices. They're the illusion of choice within a prison. Real freedom is something else entirely. Real freedom is when you can look at your entire life and say, this is mine. I chose this. Every part of it reflects my deepest values and beliefs. I compromised nothing essential. I sold out nowhere. I followed my own path even when everyone said I was wrong. Spinoza could say that. On his deathbed at 44, dying from a disease caused by the work he did to support himself while writing philosophy, he could look at his life and know he had been completely free. He had thought what he wanted to think, written what he needed to write, lived according to his own principles without compromise. Jobs could say that. When he died at 56, he had created products that billions of people loved. He had changed entire industries. He had built exactly what he envisioned, compromising nothing essential. He died knowing he had followed his own vision completely. Einstein could say that. When he died at 76, he had discovered fundamental truths about the universe. He had maintained his integrity through wars and persecution. He had never compromised his principles for comfort or safety. He died free. And Musk, still living and building, can say that now. Every day he wakes up and chooses to work on what he believes matters most, regardless of criticism, regardless of difficulty, regardless of risk. He is living in freedom. The question is, can you say that? Are you free, or are you living in some comfortable prison, telling yourself you're free while following a script someone else wrote for you? Are you working on what you believe matters, or working on what pays well or looks good or meets others' expectations? Are you living according to your own values, or according to values you absorbed from family, society, media, without ever questioning them? Are you thinking your own thoughts, or repeating thoughts you heard elsewhere? Are you following your own path, or walking a path that was laid out for you before you were born? These are uncomfortable questions. Most people avoid them their entire lives, because confronting them means confronting the possibility that you're not actually free, that you've been living in a prison of others' expectations, others' opinions, others' definitions of success and happiness. But the Sigma man doesn't avoid these questions. He asks them constantly. He examines his life ruthlessly. He checks whether he's still free, or whether he's gradually become enslaved to comfort, to approval, to convention. And when he finds areas where he's not free, he liberates himself, even if it's painful, even if it means losing things he values, even if everyone tells him he's making a mistake, because freedom is worth any price. Spinoza wrote, "The free man who lives only according to the dictate of reason is not led by fear of death, but directly desires the good, that is, desires to act, to live, and to preserve his being on the basis of seeking his own advantage. Therefore he thinks of nothing less than death, and his wisdom is a meditation on life, not on death. This is the final lesson about freedom. The free man doesn't obsess over death or try to avoid it. He focuses completely on living fully, on doing what matters, on creating what needs to be created. And in living this way, free, purposeful, committed to what he believes, he transcends death. Not in some mystical sense, but in the practical sense that his work, his ideas, his impact continue long after his body stops. Spinoza died in 1677, but his ideas are more alive now than ever. Jobs died in 2011, but his creations continue changing lives every day. Einstein died in 1955, but his discoveries continue revealing truths about the universe. They achieved a form of immortality, not through seeking it directly, but through living in complete freedom, creating from complete authenticity, contributing from complete integrity. And that's available to anyone willing to pay the price of freedom. The price is high. It requires solitude, requires misunderstanding, requires rejection, requires sacrifice of comfort, security, approval, requires the willingness to be attacked, criticized, mocked, requires risking everything you have for what you believe. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is living your entire life as a slave. A comfortable slave, perhaps, but a slave nonetheless. The alternative is dying having never truly lived, never truly chosen, never truly been free. Spinoza chose freedom. Jobs chose freedom. Einstein chose freedom. Musk chooses freedom every day. They all understood that freedom isn't a state you reach and then maintain effortlessly. It's a choice you make every single day. A choice to live by your own principles, even when it's hard. A choice to pursue truth even when it's dangerous. A choice to be yourself even when everyone wants you to be someone else. And if you want to be a Sigma man, you must make that same choice. Not once, but every day. The choice to be free. The choice to live according to your own deepest values. The choice to pursue your own vision regardless of obstacles. The choice to think your own thoughts, walk your own path, build your own empire, create your own legacy. That's what Spinoza taught. That's what Jobs, Einstein, and Musk learned from him. And that's what you must learn if you want to be truly free. Freedom isn't given. It's not a right that someone grants you. It's not a condition that exists by default. Freedom is achieved. It's conquered. It's built deliberately through thousands of small choices to reject slavery and embrace truth. And once you taste real freedom, the freedom Spinoza lived, the freedom these great men discovered, you can never go back. You can never again accept the comfortable prisons that most people live in. You can never again compromise your deepest principles for approval or comfort. You become ungovernable, uncontrollable, unmanipulatable, because free men cannot be controlled. They can be killed, but they cannot be enslaved. They can be rejected, but they cannot be broken. They can be attacked, but they cannot be stopped from thinking, creating, building. This is the ultimate lesson. This is what Spinoza died teaching. This is what Jobs, Einstein, and Musk discovered and applied. This is what separates Sigma men from everyone else. The commitment to freedom as the highest value, the willingness to sacrifice everything else, comfort, approval, security, even life itself, rather than compromise that freedom. The understanding that a single day lived in complete freedom is worth more than a lifetime lived in comfortable slavery. So the question returns to you, more urgent than ever. Are you free? Are you willing to pay the price for freedom? Are you willing to walk the lonely path of the free man? Are you willing to sacrifice comfort for truth, approval for integrity, security for purpose? If you are, then you understand Spinoza. Then you understand what Jobs, Einstein, and Musk discovered. Then you're ready to join the small brotherhood of truly free men who change the world not by following it, but by following their own inner compass, regardless of where it leads. That's freedom. That's the mission. That's the only life worth living. Spinoza never depended on any institution to validate his thinking. He didn't need universities, didn't need academies, didn't need approval from rabbis, priests, or professors. He built his entire philosophical system working alone, polishing lenses during the day and thinking at night, without any kind of institutional sponsorship. When he was excommunicated, he lost access to the entire synagogue library, lost access to the sacred texts he'd studied since childhood, lost the intellectual debates that happened in the community. Most men would have given up. How to continue studying without books, how to continue thinking without interlocutors, how to develop ideas without feedback. Spinoza found a way. He bought some essential books with the little money he earned, taught himself Latin so he could read the classics, studied mathematics on his own so he could think with logical rigor, developed his own method of philosophical investigation based on Euclidean geometry. He became completely intellectually self-sufficient. And that self-sufficiency wasn't a limitation, it was liberation, because he didn't depend on anyone to tell him if his ideas were valid. He didn't need permission to think. He didn't need approval to investigate. He was free to explore any idea, however dangerous, without fear of losing sponsorship or position. This intellectual independence was what allowed him to develop ideas that no institution would have permitted. He proved that the Bible was written by human authors, not dictated by God. He demonstrated that miracles were natural phenomena misunderstood. He showed that God and nature were the same thing. These ideas would have gotten him expelled from any university, excommunicated from any church, banned from any academy. But because he was intellectually self-sufficient, because he didn't depend on any institution for validation or support, he was free to think the unthinkable, free to investigate the forbidden, free to arrive at conclusions that contradicted everything his society believed. Steve Jobs never finished college. He attended classes that interested him, especially calligraphy, but dropped out of the formal program. He didn't have a degree, didn't have academic credentials, didn't have impressive titles on his resume, but he had something infinitely more valuable: absolute intellectual self-sufficiency. He learned design by studying Italian design on his own, learned about user experience by observing people use products, learned about simplicity by studying Zen Buddhism, learned about perfect proportions by studying architecture and calligraphy. No one taught him how to create revolutionary products. He developed his own system of thinking about design and technology, and it was exactly this self-sufficiency that made him capable of creating products no one else could imagine, because he wasn't limited by what he learned in universities. He wasn't trapped by the methods established by the industry. He thought in a completely independent and self-sufficient way. When Apple's board wanted to add more features to products, Jobs said no. When engineers wanted to add more ports and buttons, Jobs said no. When marketers wanted to target specific demographics, Jobs said no. He didn't need consensus, didn't need approval from committees. He thought independently and acted on his own conclusions. This intellectual self-sufficiency meant he could see opportunities no one else saw. While the entire technology industry was making computers more complex with more features, Jobs saw that people wanted simplicity. While everyone was adding buttons and ports, he was removing them. While everyone was targeting tech enthusiasts, he was designing for normal people. None of this came from market research or focus groups or expert consultants. It came from his own independent thinking, his own observations, his own conclusions. He was intellectually self-sufficient, and that self-sufficiency was his greatest competitive advantage. Einstein developed the theory of relativity working in a patent office, completely outside the academic world. He didn't have access to the best laboratories, didn't have research assistants, didn't have funding, didn't have a mentor. He had only his own mind, some books and paper for calculations. But this limitation forced him to develop total intellectual self-sufficiency. He couldn't delegate part of the thinking to others, couldn't depend on collaborators, had to do all the mental work alone, and it was exactly this that made him capable of making the deepest scientific revolution since Newton, because he developed an extraordinary capacity to think in a completely self-sufficient way. Most scientists of his time worked in teams. In universities with access to resources and colleagues, they could discuss their ideas, get feedback, divide the work. But they were also constrained by institutional thinking, by academic politics, by the need to conform to established paradigms. Einstein had none of these resources, but he also had none of these constraints. He was completely free to think in whatever direction his reason led him. And because he was intellectually self-sufficient, because he could work through complex problems entirely on his own, he was able to arrive at conclusions that no one working within the academic system could reach. Elon Musk didn't have training in aerospace engineering when he decided to create reusable rockets, didn't have experience in the automotive industry when he decided to create superior electric cars, didn't have background in neuroscience when he decided to create brain chips. Most people would say he wasn't qualified for any of these fields, but Musk developed extreme intellectual self-sufficiency. He reads voraciously, studies fundamental physics, learns from engineers, asks questions that go to the root of problems. He doesn't accept superficial explanations. He investigates until he understands the first principles of each area, and then he thinks independently about how things could be done differently. This intellectual self-sufficiency is what allows him to enter industries dominated by experts with decades of experience and completely revolutionize those industries. Because he's not limited by conventional knowledge, he builds his own understanding from scratch based on first principles. When SpaceX engineers told him rockets couldn't be reused economically, he didn't accept it. He studied the physics, studied the costs, studied the engineering. He broke down the problem to first principles. What is a rocket made of? What do those materials cost? What's the theoretical minimum cost? And he realized that conventional wisdom was wrong. Reusability was possible if you thought about it correctly. When Tesla was told that electric cars would always be inferior to gas cars, he didn't accept it. He studied battery chemistry, studied electric motors, studied aerodynamics. He broke everything down to first principles and realized that electric cars could be superior in every way. Acceleration, handling, efficiency, performance. This is intellectual self-sufficiency. Not accepting what experts say just because they're experts, not relying on conventional wisdom, but investigating for yourself, thinking for yourself, arriving at your own conclusions based on fundamental principles and rigorous reasoning. Most people never develop real intellectual self-sufficiency. They depend completely on experts to tell them what to think, depend on teachers to tell them what's true, depend on influencers to tell them what's important, depend on media to tell them what's happening. They completely outsource their thinking, and therefore they're never truly free, because whoever depends on others to think is a slave to whoever thinks for them. The Sigma man develops absolute intellectual self-sufficiency. He learns to investigate for himself, learns to think for himself, learns to reach his own conclusions. He uses experts as sources of information, but never as substitutes for his own thinking. He reads widely, but thinks independently. He doesn't believe something just because an expert said it. He investigates the evidence. He examines the logic. He tests the conclusions. He only accepts something as true after he's verified it himself using his own reasoning. This doesn't mean rejecting all expertise. It means not being intellectually dependent on expertise. It means having the capability to evaluate expert claims independently. It means being able to think through complex problems on your own when necessary. And when you develop true intellectual self-sufficiency, you become immune to propaganda, to manipulation, to mental control of any kind. Because no one can control a man who thinks completely for himself. You can't be sold products you don't need because you think independently about what you actually need. You can't be convinced of political positions through rhetoric because you investigate the facts yourself. You can't be manipulated through emotional appeals because you base your beliefs on reason and evidence. Intellectual self-sufficiency is the foundation of all other forms of freedom. Because if you can't think for yourself, you're not truly free no matter what else you achieve. You're just a sophisticated slave, following mental scripts that others programmed into you. But when you develop genuine intellectual self-sufficiency, when you become capable of investigating any question, thinking through any problem, reaching valid conclusions entirely on your own, then you become truly ungovernable. Then you become dangerous to any system that depends on controlling how people think. That's what Spinoza achieved. That's what Jobs, Einstein, and Musk achieved. Complete intellectual self-sufficiency. The ability to think entirely independently, to arrive at truth through their own investigation and reasoning, regardless of what anyone else believed or said. The Jewish community didn't simply reject Spinoza. They tried to force him to conform. Before the excommunication, they offered him money to stop speaking his ideas publicly. They offered a generous lifetime pension. All he had to do was stay quiet. Continue thinking whatever he wanted privately, but stop spreading ideas that threatened social order. Spinoza refused. He couldn't be bought, couldn't be silenced, couldn't be coerced into living a lie, even if that lie came with financial security. After the excommunication, the coercion attempts continued. A fanatic tried to kill him. Civil authorities investigated him. The Catholic Church persecuted him. Publishers refused to publish his works. Booksellers were arrested for selling his texts. All of society tried to force him into silence through fear, violence, and social ostracism. Spinoza resisted everything. He continued writing, continued thinking, continued living according to his convictions, because he understood something fundamental. Social coercion is the primary tool societies use to maintain conformity, and conformity is the death of freedom. He wrote, "Free men are not guided by fear or hope, but only by reason." Think about what this means. Most people's entire lives are shaped by social coercion they don't even recognize. They make choices based on what will people think of me, instead of what's right for me. They choose careers that impress others, instead of careers that fulfill them. They marry because they feel social pressure, not because they found someone they truly love. They have children because time is running out, not because they genuinely want to be parents. They live entire lives dictated by invisible social coercion, and they die without ever having made a single truly free decision. The coercion is everywhere, constant, invisible. Your family coerces you to follow certain paths. Your friends coerce you to maintain certain behaviors. Your colleagues coerce you to adopt certain attitudes. Society coerces you to want certain things, to live in certain ways, to believe certain ideas. And the coercion is sophisticated. It's not usually direct threats. It's the promise of approval if you conform, and the threat of rejection if you don't. It's the subtle pressure of expectations. It's the constant message that to be accepted, to be loved, to be valued, you must conform to what others expect. Steve Jobs constantly resisted the technology industry's social coercion. When everyone said computers needed many ports and connections, he created computers with the minimum possible. When everyone said phones needed physical keyboards, he created a phone with only a screen. When everyone said tablets were useless, he created the iPad. The industry constantly tried to force him to conform. Investors pressured, analysts criticized, competitors ridiculed. Tech journalists said he was making mistakes. Industry veterans said he didn't understand the market. The pressure was immense and constant for him to just do what everyone else was doing. But Jobs didn't let himself be coerced. He maintained his vision intact against all the social and economic pressures of the industry, and he was proven right every single time, because he understood that the moment you yield to social coercion is the moment you lose your power completely. Think about the iPhone launch. Every expert said it would fail, too expensive, too big, no keyboard, wrong target market. The pressure on Jobs to modify the design, to compromise, to make it more conventional was enormous. Every meeting with carriers, with suppliers, with investors involved people telling him to change it. He refused every compromise. The iPhone launched exactly as he envisioned it, and it became the most successful product in history. But that only happened because he had the strength to resist absolutely massive social coercion. Einstein resisted coercion from the German scientific community when the Nazis took power. Scientists he'd known for decades began denouncing his Jewish physics. Colleagues who'd worked with him signed manifestos against him. The university where he taught fired him. The government confiscated his assets and revoked his citizenship. All of German society was saying, "You no longer belong here. Your ideas are no longer valid, you're no longer welcome." The coercion was total, social, professional, legal, even violent. Einstein could have tried to conform, could have tried to prove his loyalty to Germany, could have modified his theories to be more German, could have denounced other Jews to save himself. The pressure to do something, anything, to fit back in was enormous. He did the opposite. He left Germany and never returned. He continued defending his scientific theories. He continued being publicly Jewish. He completely resisted all attempts at social coercion, and history proved him right. The scientists who conformed, who adapted their science to Nazi ideology, are forgotten or remembered with shame. Einstein, who resisted all coercion, is remembered as one of the greatest scientists who ever lived. Elon Musk faces constant and massive social coercion. The media tries to force him to act in certain ways. Politicians try to force him to support certain causes. Activists try to force him to adopt certain positions. Investors try to force him to focus only on short-term profit. Every time he resists, the attacks intensify. Boycotts are organized. Defamation campaigns are launched. Lawsuits are filed. The pressure is immense and constant for him to conform to social expectations. Musk continues doing exactly what he believes is right, regardless of social consequences. He speaks his mind even when it costs him billions in market value. He pursues long-term missions even when Wall Street wants quarterly profits. He takes positions based on his own thinking, even when they're unpopular, because he understands that the moment you start making decisions based on social pressure rather than your own reasoning and values, you've lost your freedom. You've become a puppet, dancing to whatever tune society plays. Social coercion is invisible to most people because they've completely internalized social expectations. They don't even realize they're being coerced. They think they're making free choices, when in reality they're just following predetermined social scripts. They think they chose their career, but really they chose from a narrow menu of acceptable careers. They think they chose their lifestyle, but really they chose from options society presented as normal. They think they chose their values, but really they absorbed values from family, school, media, without ever questioning them. The Sigma man recognizes social coercion in all its subtle forms. He sees when he's being manipulated through social approval or disapproval. He perceives when invisible pressures are trying to mold him, and he consciously and deliberately resists. He doesn't make decisions based on what will people think. He makes decisions based on what do I actually believe is right. He doesn't choose paths because they're socially approved. He chooses paths because they align with his own values and goals. This requires constant vigilance, because social coercion is constant. Every day, in hundreds of small ways, society tries to shape you, to mold you, to make you conform. Every conversation, every interaction, every piece of media contains subtle and not so subtle messages about how you should be, what you should want, what you should believe. The Sigma man remains aware of these pressures, and he resists them, not by being contrary for the sake of being contrary, but by maintaining his own center, his own values, his own vision, regardless of external pressure, because he understands that freedom truly exists only when you're capable of acting according to your own convictions, even when all of society is trying to force you to do the opposite. Spinoza lived in a time when there was absolute consensus on fundamental questions. Everyone agreed that God had dictated the Bible word for word. Everyone agreed that miracles were real supernatural events. Everyone agreed that organized religion was necessary for morality. This consensus had existed for thousands of years. Billions of people throughout history believed it. Spinoza looked at this millennial consensus and said, "Everyone is wrong." He didn't say this out of arrogance. He said it because he investigated deeply and discovered that the consensus was based on false assumptions, on flawed logic, on misinterpreted evidence. He wrote the theological political treatise, methodically demonstrating that the Bible was written by multiple human authors, that miracles were misunderstood natural phenomena, that morality doesn't depend on religion, and he was hated for it, because most people don't tolerate someone challenging consensus, especially when that consensus is comfortable and ancient. Spinoza wrote, "The opinion of the majority is proof of nothing. Truth is not determined by voting." This is one of the most important and most ignored lessons of human history. The majority has been wrong about almost everything. The majority once believed the earth was flat. The majority once believed the sun revolved around the earth. The majority once believed certain races were superior to others. The majority once believed women were intellectually inferior. The majority once believed slavery was morally acceptable. The majority's consensus is frequently, dramatically, catastrophically wrong. And the men who changed the world were those who had the courage to despise mediocre consensus and seek truth independently. Think about how powerful consensus is as a force for conformity. When billions of people believe something, when that belief has persisted for centuries, when it's embedded in every institution and every tradition, questioning it seems not just wrong, but insane. The weight of consensus is crushing. Most people can't withstand that pressure. They assume that if so many people believe something for so long, it must be true. They can't imagine that entire civilizations could be built on false premises. They can't conceive that billions of people could be mistaken about something fundamental. But history shows us over and over that this is exactly what happens. Massive consensus, lasting centuries, can be completely wrong. And it takes exceptional individuals to recognize this and challenge it. Steve Jobs completely despised the technology industry's consensus. When everyone agreed that computers should be for technical enthusiasts, he created computers for ordinary people. When everyone agreed that design didn't matter in technology, he made design the most important thing. When everyone agreed that consumers wanted more options, he offered fewer options, but perfectly executed. He said once, "People don't know what they want until you show them." This is contempt for market consensus. It's refusing to follow what the majority thinks they want. It's having the vision to create something no one is asking for, because you understand what they really need better than they do themselves. The consensus in the technology industry in the late 1990s was that Apple was finished. Every expert agreed. Every analyst agreed. The company was bleeding money, losing market share, had no clear direction. The consensus was so strong that Michael Dell, founder of Dell Computers, was asked what he would do if he were running Apple. His answer, "I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders." That was the consensus. Apple was dead. Everyone knew it. It was obvious, inevitable. Jobs came back and proved every single expert wrong. He didn't just save Apple. He turned it into the most valuable company in the world. But he could only do this because he had absolute contempt for the mediocre consensus. He didn't care what experts thought. He didn't care what analysts predicted. He had his own vision, and he pursued it regardless of consensus. Einstein despised the scientific consensus of his time. When the entire physics community agreed that ether existed and was the medium through which light traveled, Einstein showed that ether didn't exist. When everyone agreed that time was absolute and equal for all observers, Einstein proved that time is relative. When everyone agreed that mass and energy were completely different things, Einstein demonstrated they're the same thing through E = mc2. Each of these discoveries contradicted established scientific consensus, and each one was correct. But notice what Einstein didn't do. He didn't challenge consensus just to be contrary. He didn't reject established science out of arrogance or rebellion. He investigated rigorously. He calculated carefully. He tested thoroughly. And only when his investigations led him to conclusions that contradicted consensus did he challenge it. This is the crucial distinction. Contempt for consensus doesn't mean automatic rejection of popular beliefs. It means refusing to accept something as true just because everyone believes it. It means investigating independently and following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it contradicts what billions of people believe. Elon Musk systematically despises expert consensus. When the entire automotive industry agreed that electric cars were commercially unviable, he built Tesla. When all rocket experts agreed that reusability was economically impossible, he created rockets that land and are reused. When everyone agreed that boring tunnels was expensive and slow, he created the Boring Company to make tunnels faster and cheaper. But here's something crucial that's happening right now in this story. You, reading these words at this moment, are being confronted with a choice. Are you going to accept what you've been told your whole life? Or are you going to investigate for yourself? Think about it and leave a comment. What consensus have you been following your whole life without questioning? What belief does everyone hold that you've accepted without investigation? Maybe it's about career, that you need a certain type of job to be successful. Maybe it's about relationships, that you need to follow a certain relationship escalator. Maybe it's about money, that you need certain things to be happy. Maybe it's about life itself, that you need to live in a certain way to have a good life. Whatever it is, there's probably some consensus belief you've accepted without truly investigating it yourself. And if you're serious about freedom, if you're serious about becoming a Sigma man, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because what's coming next will challenge even more of the consensus beliefs you've accepted. And you need to be here for it. The journey we're on isn't for people who want comfortable lies, it's for people who want uncomfortable truths. If that's you, hit that subscribe button now. Let's continue this journey together. The Sigma man doesn't follow consensus. He investigates, he questions, he tests. And when he discovers the consensus is wrong, he has the courage to despise it publicly and follow truth, no matter how alone that leaves him. Because he understands that consensus is frequently just collective fear, disguised as wisdom. It's a group of people repeating the same ideas, not because they've investigated them, but because it's safe to agree with the majority, and safety is the opposite of truth. Truth requires courage. Courage to be wrong. Courage to be different. Courage to despise mediocre consensus and seek real understanding. When you develop contempt for mediocre consensus, you free yourself from one of the most powerful forms of social control. Because once you realize that billions of people being wrong is not just possible, but common, you can never again be intimidated by popular opinion. You can stand alone against the world if necessary, not out of arrogance, but out of commitment to truth, out of understanding that reality doesn't care about consensus, and neither should you. Spinoza lived with monastic discipline. He woke at the same time every day, worked polishing lenses with absolute precision, ate simple meals, kept very few possessions, wrote philosophy for hours at a time with total focus, didn't allow himself distractions, didn't waste time, didn't indulge in excesses. Most people would look at this life and think, what a limited and sad existence. They would see only restriction, only denial, only deprivation. But Spinoza understood something that escapes most people. Discipline is not the opposite of freedom. Discipline is the path to freedom. Undisciplined people are slaves to their impulses. They wake up late because they can't resist the temptation to stay in bed 10 more minutes. They eat too much because they can't resist the impulse to eat when they're not hungry. They spend money they don't have on things they don't need because they can't resist immediate gratification. They lose hours on social media because they can't resist the dopamine of notifications. They think they're free because they do what they want in the moment. But in reality, they're slaves to every passing impulse. They're controlled by momentary desires. They're prisoners of their own weaknesses. Spinoza was free because he had absolute discipline. He controlled his impulses instead of being controlled by them. He consciously decided how to use his time instead of wasting it on momentary gratifications. He lived according to his deep values, not according to his superficial desires. And this discipline didn't make him rigid or unhappy. It made him deeply free and deeply happy, because he was doing exactly what he wanted to do: think, investigate, discover truths. Discipline just removed all the distractions and impulses that would prevent him from doing what really mattered to him. Think about what this means. The undisciplined person thinks he wants to scroll social media for hours, but does he really want that? Or is he just responding to an impulse, a dopamine trigger, a habit? After those hours, does he feel fulfilled? Does he feel he spent his time well? Or does he feel vaguely empty and frustrated? The disciplined person doesn't respond to the impulse. He considers, is this how I want to spend my time? Does this align with my values and goals? And if the answer is no, he doesn't do it. Not because someone is stopping him, but because he's free enough to choose not to be controlled by the impulse. This is real freedom. Freedom from your own destructive patterns. Freedom from impulses that don't serve you. Freedom to live according to your actual values instead of your momentary urges. Steve Jobs had extreme discipline regarding focus. He ruthlessly cut everything that wasn't essential. When he returned to Apple, the company had dozens of products. He cut everything except 4 categories. Executives protested. He maintained the decision. This brutal discipline of focus is what saved Apple. Because resources are always limited, attention is always limited, and you can only create extraordinary products if you have the discipline to say no to 99 good things, so you can say yes to one extraordinary thing. Jobs said, "I'm as proud of what we don't do as what we do." This is discipline. It's the ability to resist temptations, opportunities, distractions. And this discipline was what made Apple capable of creating world-changing products. Think about how much discipline this requires in practice. Every day, people bring you ideas, good ideas, potentially profitable ideas, and you have to say no. Every day, opportunities arise, real opportunities, and you have to say no. Because you're disciplined enough to stay focused on what truly matters. Most CEOs can't do this. They chase every opportunity. They try to do everything. They can't say no, and their companies become unfocused, mediocre, ordinary. Jobs had the discipline to remain ruthlessly focused, and that discipline created one of the most valuable companies in history. Einstein had absolute discipline in his method of thinking. He didn't accept superficial answers. He didn't settle for partial explanations. When he had a question, he investigated until he reached the deepest foundations. He had the discipline to think rigorously, even when it was difficult, even when it was confusing, even when it took years. This intellectual discipline was what allowed him to discover truths no one else could see. Because most people give up when thinking gets difficult. They accept superficial explanations because it's easier. They stop investigating when they get confused. Einstein had the discipline to continue thinking rigorously until he achieved total clarity. Consider the development of the theory of relativity. Einstein spent years on this problem, years of intense, rigorous thinking. Most people would have given up, would have accepted the Newtonian framework, would have concluded the problem was unsolvable, but Einstein had the discipline to continue, day after day, year after year, thinking about the same fundamental problems, not distracted by easier problems, not tempted to work on something with quicker results, just pure, disciplined, rigorous thinking about the deepest questions. That discipline led to one of the greatest scientific discoveries in history, but it required years of sustained, focused effort. Most people don't have that kind of discipline. They want quick results. They want immediate satisfaction. They can't maintain focus on difficult problems for extended periods. Elon Musk has extreme discipline regarding use of time. He divides his day into 5-minute blocks. He optimizes every moment. He doesn't waste time on unnecessary meetings, on unproductive conversations, on activities that don't contribute to his goals. This seems restrictive, but this discipline is what allows him to simultaneously run several revolutionary companies. He has freedom to work on multiple transformative projects because he has the discipline to use his time with maximum efficiency. Think about what this means in practice. Every minute of every day is accounted for. Every meeting has a clear purpose and time limit. Every conversation is evaluated for whether it's productive. Every activity is assessed for whether it moves toward goals. Most people would find this suffocating, but Musk finds it liberating. Because this discipline means he can accomplish in a week what most people couldn't accomplish in a month. This discipline creates freedom to do more, achieve more, impact more. Most people confuse freedom with absence of restrictions. They think being free is being able to do anything at any time. But that's just chaos. That's being a slave to impulses. True freedom comes through discipline. Discipline to control your impulses. Discipline to focus on what's essential. Discipline to think rigorously. Discipline to use your time well. Discipline to live according to your deepest values, even when it's difficult. The Sigma man understands this deeply. He doesn't see discipline as restriction. He sees discipline as a liberation tool. Because through discipline, he becomes free from his own destructive impulses, free from distractions, free from wasting his life on things that don't matter. Spinoza wrote, "The free man is one who lives only according to what reason dictates, and reason requires discipline, requires the ability to resist emotional impulses, requires the ability to do the difficult even when the easy is available. Without discipline, you're not free. You're just a sophisticated animal, responding to stimuli, chasing immediate pleasures, avoiding immediate pains. With discipline, you become capable of choosing based on reason, based on values, based on long-term thinking. This is why every great man in history had extreme discipline, not because they were naturally disciplined, but because they understood that discipline is the foundation of all achievement, all greatness, all real freedom. Spinoza could have yielded when the Jewish community offered money to silence him. His ego could have clung to social position, to respect, to belonging. But he chose truth over ego. He let his ego die so that reason could live. After the excommunication, he could have become bitter, could have spent his life taking revenge, could have become obsessed with proving he was right and that everyone who rejected him was wrong. His ego had every justification in the world to become the center of his life, but Spinoza completely transcended his ego. He didn't write philosophy to prove he was smart, didn't seek revenge against those who rejected him, didn't spend his life trying to be recognized. He simply sought truth, regardless of how that made him look or be perceived. He wrote, "The more the mind understands things through their causes, the less it is affected by emotions that arise from external sources. This is ego death. It's stopping seeing everything through the filter of, how does this affect me, and starting to see things as they really are. It's transcending the limited and egocentric perspective and adopting a universal and rational perspective. Think about how much the ego distorts everything. When your ego is in control, You can't accept being wrong, because being wrong feels like a threat to your identity. You can't change your mind because changing your mind feels like admitting weakness. You can't acknowledge others' good ideas because that feels like diminishing your own importance. The ego makes objective thinking impossible because the ego filters everything through, how does this affect my status, my reputation, my self-image? And when you're filtering everything through ego, you can't see reality clearly. You see only a distorted version of reality that's been twisted to protect your ego. Steve Jobs went through a similar transformation. The young Jobs was extremely egocentric. He wanted to be recognized, wanted to be admired, wanted to prove he was special. His ego drove many of his decisions. When he was fired from Apple, that was a massive ego death. Everything he'd built his identity around was publicly destroyed. He was no longer Steve Jobs of Apple. He was Steve Jobs who got fired from his own company. But it was exactly this ego death that transformed him into the leader who would eventually create Apple's most important products. Because when he came back, he was no longer trying to prove anything. He was no longer obsessed with recognition. He was focused only on creating extraordinary products. His ego had died, and in its place was pure clarity of purpose. Think about what this meant in practice. The young Jobs needed to be right all the time, needed everyone to acknowledge his brilliance, needed constant validation. This made him difficult, erratic, often counterproductive. The mature Jobs who returned to Apple was different. He still had strong opinions, still pushed for excellence. But he wasn't driven by ego. He was driven by the mission to create great products. He could admit when he was wrong. He could take advice. He could collaborate, because his ego was no longer in the way. Einstein also transcended ego. When he became world famous after the theory of relativity was experimentally confirmed, he could have become obsessed with his fame, could have spent the rest of his life enjoying recognition, giving lectures, basking in public adoration. But he continued working on physics, continued trying to solve fundamental problems, continued being humble about what he knew and what he didn't know. He didn't let ego fame destroy his commitment to truth. Later in life, Einstein spent decades working on unified field theory. He never succeeded. Most of his later work led nowhere. His ego could have been devastated by this. Here was the greatest physicist of the 20th century, spending decades on a problem he couldn't solve. But Einstein's ego wasn't invested in being right all the time or succeeding at everything. His ego had died long ago. He was simply following his curiosity, investigating what seemed important, regardless of whether he succeeded or how it made him look. Elon Musk constantly faces ego temptations. He's one of the richest men in the world. He could easily spend his life showing off, enjoying luxury, letting his ego expand infinitely. But he continues working 16 hours a day on extremely difficult problems. He continues risking his fortune on projects that could fail. He continues focused on missions that completely transcend his individual ego, making humanity multiplanetary, solving climate change, creating beneficial AI. This is only possible when you kill the ego. When you stop seeing everything through the lens of, how does this benefit me, and start seeing through the lens of, what is true, what is important, what needs to be done. Think about how radically different this is from how most people operate. Most people's entire lives are filtered through ego. Every decision is about, how will this make me look? Every action is calculated for maximum ego benefit. Every interaction is an opportunity to boost ego status. This is exhausting. And it makes clear thinking impossible, because ego constantly distorts reality to protect itself. The ego can't accept uncomfortable truths, can't acknowledge weaknesses, can't change course even when it's obviously necessary. Most people never kill the ego. They live their entire lives completely self-centered. Every decision is filtered through, how does this make me look? Or, how does this make me feel? Or, how does this benefit me? They're prisoners of egocentric perspective, and therefore they can never think truly rationally, because ego distorts everything. Ego makes it impossible to accept inconvenient truths, makes it impossible to admit when you're wrong, makes it impossible to follow reason when it contradicts your personal interests. The Sigma man deliberately kills the ego. He practices seeing things objectively, not through the filter of how they affect him. He develops the ability to admit when he's wrong without it destroying his sense of identity. He learns to follow truth even when it doesn't personally benefit him. This doesn't mean becoming without personality, doesn't mean becoming passive, doesn't mean having no ambitions. It means transcending the limited perspective of ego and adopting a broader, more rational, more true perspective. When you kill the ego, you become capable of changing your mind based on evidence instead of clinging to positions because you've invested ego in them. You become capable of acknowledging others' superior ideas instead of feeling threatened. You become capable of pursuing truth, even when that truth is unflattering to you. Spinoza wrote about this extensively. He understood that the ego is the primary obstacle to clear thinking. The ego wants to feel important, to be right, to be validated, and these ego needs constantly distort how we perceive reality. But when you transcend ego, when you kill it deliberately through understanding, something extraordinary happens. You become capable of seeing things as they actually are, instead of as your ego wants them to be. You become capable of following reason wherever it leads instead of only where it flatters you. This is true freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of your own ego. Freedom to think clearly. Freedom to act rationally. Freedom to pursue truth without ego distortion. Spinoza knew he would die young. He had severe respiratory problems, probably caused by the dust from the lenses he polished. He coughed blood, had difficulty breathing. He knew he wouldn't live a long life. But this didn't devastate him, because he understood something profound about eternity. He wrote in the Ethics, "We feel and experience that we are eternal." This seems mystical, but Spinoza wasn't talking about religious afterlife. He was talking about something deeper. He was talking about how true ideas transcend time. When you discover a genuine truth, that truth doesn't die when you die. It continues existing. It continues being true. It becomes part of eternal human knowledge. And in that sense, the truest part of you, your reason, your discoveries, your clear thinking, becomes eternal. Think about what this means. Spinoza's body died in 1677. His physical form dissolved, returned to nature, but his ideas didn't die. His philosophy didn't die. His insights about God, nature, freedom, ethics, these didn't disappear when his heart stopped beating. Instead, they continued. They spread. They influenced other thinkers. They changed how people understand reality. 300 years later, his ideas are more alive than ever. More people study Spinoza today than did during his lifetime. His influence is greater now than it was when he lived. This is eternity through thought, not mystical immortality, but the practical reality that ideas, when they're true and important, transcend the lifespan of their creator. Spinoza died poor and forgotten in 1677, but his ideas didn't die. They continued existing, continued influencing thinkers, continued transforming how people understand God, nature, ethics, freedom. 300 years later, his ideas are more alive than ever. He achieved eternity, not through seeking it directly, but through living in complete freedom, thinking with complete clarity, discovering truths that were actually true. And those truths, because they were actually true, became eternal. Steve Jobs understood this. He said once, "We want to leave a mark on the universe." He wasn't talking about being rich or famous. He was talking about creating something that would continue existing after he left, something that would permanently change how people live, and he succeeded. The iPhone fundamentally changed how billions of people communicate, work, create. Even after Jobs' death, this creation continues impacting humanity. He achieved a form of eternity through truly innovative creation. Think about this. Jobs died in 2011, but his impact didn't die. The products he created continue shaping how billions of people live. The design philosophy he developed continues influencing countless designers. The business principles he established continue guiding companies. His body is gone, but his ideas live on. His creations live on. His influence lives on. This is eternity through thought and creation. Einstein also. His equations will continue being true for billions of years. Long after humanity ceases to exist, MC2 will continue being a fundamental truth about the universe. He achieved eternity through true discovery. When Einstein published the theory of relativity, he wasn't thinking about immortality. He was thinking about understanding how the universe actually works. But because he discovered something actually true, something fundamental about reality, that discovery became eternal. Billions of years from now, if there are other civilizations discovering physics, they will arrive at the same truths Einstein discovered, because these truths aren't Einstein's opinions. They're facts about how reality works, and facts about reality are eternal. Elon Musk is pursuing eternity through making humanity multiplanetary. If he succeeds, humanity will continue existing even if something catastrophic happens to Earth. He'll literally be extending human existence toward eternity. But even beyond that practical goal, Musk is pursuing eternity through advancing human capabilities. Electric cars that accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, reusable rockets that make space accessible, brain-computer interfaces that could extend human cognition, AI systems that could amplify human intelligence. These aren't just business projects, they're attempts to fundamentally advance human civilization, and if they succeed, their impact will be eternal. Humanity will be different because of what Musk created, and that difference will cascade forward through all future generations. Most people waste their lives pursuing temporary things. Money they can't take with them. Fame that disappears when they die. Pleasures that are forgotten instantly. They live completely in the temporary and die completely. Think about what most people optimize for. Comfort, pleasure, status, wealth, all temporary, all meaningless in the long run, all forgotten within a generation or two of their death. Even if they achieve these things, even if they become rich, famous, comfortable, what does it matter? 100 years after they die, no one will remember their name. Their wealth will be spent or dispersed. Their fame will be forgotten. They'll have lived and died without making any permanent impact on reality. The Sigma man lives for the eternal. He asks himself, what can I create that will continue existing after I leave? What truths can I discover that will be true forever? What impact can I have that will permanently change the course of things? This changes everything about how you live. When you're living for eternity, you make completely different choices than when you're living for temporary gratification. You don't waste time on things that won't matter in 100 years. You don't pursue fame or status that will evaporate when you die. You don't optimize for comfort when you could be optimizing for impact. Instead, you focus on what's actually important, on discovering truths that are actually true, on creating things that are actually valuable, on solving problems that actually matter, on contributing something that will actually last. Spinoza wrote, "The free man thinks of nothing less than death, and his wisdom is a meditation not on death, but on life." This seems contradictory with talking about eternity, but it makes perfect sense. You don't achieve eternity by thinking obsessively about death. You achieve eternity by living so fully, so truly, so significantly, that something of you transcends your physical death. Through clear thought, through true creation, through genuine discovery, through real impact, these things become eternal. And in that sense, the truest part of you, not your body, not your ego, but your contribution to truth and goodness, becomes eternal. Think about what this means for how you live. Every day you have a choice. You can spend your time on temporary things, pleasures, distractions, status games, or you can spend your time on eternal things, truth, creation, impact. Most people choose the temporary. It's easier. It's more immediately gratifying. It doesn't require the discipline and sacrifice that pursuing eternal things requires. But those who choose the eternal, those who dedicate themselves to discovering truth, to creating value, to solving real problems, they achieve something most people never achieve. They transcend their own mortality through the permanence of their contributions. Spinoza died at 44, but he achieved more eternity in 44 years of focused, truth-seeking life than most people achieve in 80 years of comfortable, ordinary existence, because he lived for truth, not for comfort, for eternity, not for the temporary. Jobs died at 56, but he achieved eternity through creating products that transformed billions of lives, products that will influence human civilization for generations. Einstein died at 76, but he achieved eternity through discovering truths that will remain true until the heat death of the universe. And Musk, still living and building, is actively working on extending human civilization toward eternity, making us multiplanetary, accelerating sustainable energy, advancing AI. Each of these pursuits has the potential for eternal impact. This is the final lesson. This is what separates Sigma men from everyone else. They live for eternity, not for the temporary. They optimize for permanent impact, not for temporary pleasure. They dedicate themselves to what will matter in 1,000 years, not just what feels good today. So the question comes back to you one final time. What are you living for? What are you building? What will remain of your life after you're gone? Are you spending your days on temporary pleasures that will be forgotten, or are you working on something eternal? Are you pursuing comfort and status, or are you pursuing truth and impact? The choice is yours, but choose carefully, because one path leads to eternal significance, and the other leads to being completely forgotten within a generation of your death. Spinoza, Jobs, Einstein, Musk, they all chose eternity. They all chose to dedicate their lives to something larger than themselves, something that would transcend their individual existence, something that would become part of the permanent fabric of human civilization. That path is available to you too. Not easy, not comfortable, but available. The question is, do you have the courage to take it?